Chair Duffy, we may need to check to make sure that Mr. Johnson is with us. We admitted him into the room, but I don't see him yet, and we have not conducted a sound check with him.
Okay. We'll hold until we make sure that he is on and able to communicate.
Mr. Jones, you may want to check with him again. We admitted him into the room, but then he never appeared.
Okay, well, I'll see what I can find out.
At the moment, our host screen is showing the message that he's joining.
There's probably something on his end that he needs to tap or click to be able to.
Yeah, he now dropped as a participant, though. He's not showing any longer.
Okay, we're going to give it about 1 more minute and then we'll go ahead and start, and Mr. Johnson can continue to work to get on. If not, he'll have to phone in.
Yeah, Mr. Jones, I would suggest that if he's having difficulty with the video, then the phone system would work as well.
John, have we lost our counsel, Casey Jones?
Well, he's certainly in the room. He's muted and his video's off, but he may vary. I'm sure he can hear us. He's probably checking in with his.
All right,
In
we're
fact,
going
I
to go
can see
ahead
him now.
All right,
He's
why don't
live.
we go ahead and get started? It's 9:05. Very good. Welcome, everybody. We are on the record and video streaming. I call the evidentiary hearing to order for docket number 23 CONS 3157 CPEN in the matter of the failure of Kodiak Petroleum Inc. to comply with KAR 82-3-120 and KAR 82-3-120 3-133 by operating under a suspended license. I'm Susan Duffy, Chair of the Commission, and will serve as the presiding officer for this hearing. I'm joined by fellow Commissioners Dwight Keene and Andrew French. Regarding entries of appearance, I'll start with Commission staff.
Thank you, Tristan Kimbrell, on behalf of Commission staff and the public generally.
Thank you. Operator,
Thank you. Casey Jones, Hinkle Law Firm, on behalf of Kodiak Petroleum Inc.
very good. Does staff have any recommendation regarding notice of this hearing?
Yes, notice of this hearing was contained in the presiding officer order setting this evidentiary hearing filed on May 15th, 2023. The order was properly served on all parties. Staff further notes that all parties are in attendance today. Based on these facts, staff recommends the commission find that notice is proper and that the commission has jurisdiction to hear the matter at this time and place.
Are there any objections to notice?
No.
Hearing no objections and based on staff's recommendation, I find that notice is proper and that the commission has jurisdiction over this proceeding at this time and place. We'll move on to a few preliminary matters and then we'll discuss procedure. As we are conducting this over Zoom, sometimes things go awry. As we know right now, if any party encounters a technical issue, please ask to go off the record. We'll resolve the issue and go back on the record. Next, witnesses are asked to keep microphones off or muted when not scheduled to talk. And if everybody now would mute your cell phones and other electronic devices, that would be appreciated. Third, so that parties are aware, if the commission needs to consult, we'll go off the record and enter what is called a Zoom breakout room to discuss what we need to. We will then return from the breakout room and go back on the record. Finally, as we're doing this by Zoom, please be careful to identify exactly what you're referring to when discussing pre-filed testimony and filings. We have copies of all the materials, so we should be able to follow along. Do parties have any other preliminary matters to take up at this time?
No.
Very good. We'll begin with opening statements, followed by the examination of witnesses. After direct examination of each witness, there will be an opportunity for cross-examination, commission questions, and redirect. Following witness examination, we will conclude with closing statements by the parties and arrange for the filing of post-hearing briefs if that is necessary. Okay, we're going to move to opening statements, and Mr. Kimbrell, if you would please.
Thank you, Chair Duffy. Commissioners, this docket is about taking risks, taking unnecessary risks. Sometimes taking risk pays off for an operator, and sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't, the operator should bear the consequences of its actions. It is undisputed that Kodiak Petroleum's license was suspended on October 27th, 2022. The notice of license suspension letter that Kodiak received clearly stated that Kodiak's license was suspended and that it was illegal for Kodiak to conduct oil and gas operations. However, the letter also stated that staff would not begin checking to see if Kodiak Petroleum had shut in its wells until after November 6th, 2022. Now, instead of immediately shutting in its wells when its license was suspended, Kodiak Petroleum waited until November 4th or 5th to tell its pumpers to begin shutting in its wells. Kodiak Petroleum waited until the last possible moment to begin shutting in its wells, knowing the staff wouldn't start checking its leases until after November 6th. Kodiak Petroleum took an unnecessary risk, producing oil and gas as much as possible before shutting its wells. And it took this risk even though its license was suspended and it was illegal for it to conduct oil and gas operations. Unfortunately for Kodiak, the risk didn't pay off. As stated in the pre-filed testimonies of both Kodiak Petroleum's witnesses, one of Kodiak Petroleum's wells didn't get shut in until November 8th, 2022, after the deadline in the license suspension letter. So this docket is about an operator who decided to take a risk to keep producing oil and gas right up to the deadline, even though its license was already suspended, and the operator getting caught taking that risk. Kodiak should not be rewarded for taking an unnecessary risk. It should receive the exact same penalty that any other operator would receive for continuing to produce oil and gas on a suspended license. Consequently, staff asks that the commission affirm the $10,000 penalty in this docket. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrell. Mr. Jones, Casey Jones, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. The hearing today in regards to the penalty order issued to Kodiak for the McReynolds 1016 well in Rooks County, it is not the only thing that needs to be considered when looking at this and the entirety of this situation. It is not Kodiak's intention here today to attempt to persuade the commission that this penalty order should be dismissed altogether. Instead, it is Kodiak's position that once the facts surrounding all of the circumstances that occurred in late 2022 are considered, including those that led up to the temporary license suspension, as well as what occurred after the license suspension happened. Once all these facts are viewed together, the $10,000 fine issued in this penalty order, we believe will be viewed as being in excess of the amount that is necessary to deter future misconduct. While the penalty order that is the subject of today's hearing relates to the McReynolds well, it is important to understand what happened before that penalty order occurred. The evidence will show that in the spring of 2022, Kodiak obtained an extension for an MIT test on its Seltman-Frick #1 well in Pawnee County, Kansas. Kodiak then discovered that the well had issues in the formation in which it was currently permitted and determined that it was necessary to recomplete that well into a shallower formation. Kodiak then filed design approval for recompletion of the well and subsequently obtained approval to recomplete that well. However, after filing for design approval, Kodiak received the notice of the penalty order regarding the fact that the MIT had not been performed on the Seltman-Frick #1 well, and that its license would be suspended if it did not achieve compliance. It was only after the penalty order was received that Kodiak then obtained approval to recomplete its well into a shallower formation. The letter came on October 10th, 2022 from the Kansas City Corporation Commission UIC department, and it stated that the design was approved and that once recompletion had been finished, then an MIT test would be needed at that time before Kodiak could begin injection into the well. Kodiak was under the belief at that time that the MIT test would only be needed once it finished recompletion operations. Although it may have been a mistaken belief that such requirement for a new MIT after recompletion took place of the prior request for an MIT of the Seltman-Frick well, the timing of these letters and communications put Kodiak in a position where it did not fully understand that an MIT test on the old configuration of the well was still needed. In November of 2022, Kodiak then received its letter from KCC legal staff, with letter dated October 27, 2022, informing it that the MIT test for the prior configuration of the Seltman-Frick was still needed, that it had not been completed on time, and that if wells were not shut in prior to November 6, 2022, staff would recommend a shut-in order and $10,000 fine penalty. It was at this time Kodiak recognized that it had misinterpreted the fact of the letter from the UIC department approving recompletion of the Seltman-Frick well, and that it still had the requirement to perform the MIT on the old configuration of the well. It once received this letter, Kodiak attempted to have its wells shut in. It took actions. It contacted its pumpers, including the pumper of the McReynolds well. As you will hear today, there was some additional circumstances involving that pumper that prevented him from getting out and shutting in the well when he was contacted by Kodiak. In fact, Kodiak contacted this pumper 4 days before the November 8th deadline mentioned in staff's letter. Again, due to some unfortunate circumstances, the pumper was unable to make it out and ultimately did not shut down the well until November 8th. Kodiak has been a licensed operator since the 1980s. Prior to these issues in late 2022, it has only dealt with a few small compliance issues, all of which have been timely corrected. It is our position that given Kodiak's operational history and the facts and circumstances which led to the instant penalty order, the commission should reconsider whether the $10,000 penalty is truly appropriate in this situation. In doing so, we believe it will become apparent that the penalty issued to Kodiak should be significantly less than $10,000. Thank you.
Okay, very good. At this time, we're ready to proceed to the examination of witnesses. There is no court reporter. I will be swearing in the witnesses. And Mr. Kimbrell, you may call your first witness.
Thank you. Staff calls Eric McLaren.
Okay, Mr. McLaren,
Yes,
there you are. Okay. If you'll raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
yes.
Very good. Mr. Kimbrell.
Thank you. Mr. McLaren, could you please state your full name for the record?
Fred Eric McLaren.
By whom and in what capacity are you employed?
I'm employed by the state of Kansas in the Conservation Division as a compliance officer, UIC coordinator, and a field tech.
What is your work address?
I'm sorry, say it again.
What is your work address?
It's 210 East Front View, Suite A, Dodge City, Kansas, 67801.
Are you the same Eric McLaren who caused to be filed in this docket direct testimony consisting of 4 pages?
Yes,
Was this testimony created by you or at your direction?
yes,
Now that you're under oath, do you have any corrections to make to your testimony?
I do not.
If I asked you today the same questions contained in your testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Do you swear the answers contained in your pre-filed testimony were and are true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, I do.
Chair Duffy, at this time, I move for the admission of Eric McLaren's pre-filed direct testimony to the formal record.
Very good. Do I hear any objections? Hearing none, it's so ordered.
Thank you. I would tender the witness for cross-examination.
Very good. Mr. Jones.
Thank you. Mr. McLaren, it's my understanding that you are in the UIC department for the KCC. Is that correct?
In District 1, yes, I am.
Thank you. In your position, do you review applications or matters related to injection wells?
My involvement as far as the downhole configuration of a well would come after the application process is approved by the UIC department in Wichita.
Okay. So in your experience, do you know whether when an operator submits an application for recompleting a currently existing injection well, do you know what the procedure is for approving and reviewing that application for recompletion?
For the new application?
The application for recompletion of the existing well into a different zone.
Basically, it would have to be approved by the UIC department in Wichita before anything would happen at the district level for the new well.
Right. Do you know, once an operator submits an application for recompletion of an existing injection well, is an MIT test required on the current well before the operator can begin its recompletion operations?
The MIT requirements on the old well do not go away with application renewal. The deadline MIT requirements are steadfast.
Understood. If I guess what I'm asking is, if there's not already a deadline coming up, if an operator was to submit an application for recompleting the well into a new zone, would a new MIT test be required on the currently existing well before the operator would be able to begin its recompletion operations?
Absolutely.
And what would be the reasoning for conducting an MIT test on the current well before recompletion operations are begun to recomplete the well in a different zone?
Because the MIT requirements had not been satisfied for the old well.
And what would be the requirement that would need to be satisfied for the old well in the event that we're not coming up to a new MIT deadline?
The requirements would be to either pressure test with the state witness the annulus, or to set a plug and pressure test the casing would satisfy the MIT requirements.
And that is all required to be done before recompletion operations can begin, or is that required only after the well has been recompleted?
I was speaking of the requirements of the old well and the MIT deadline date on it. As far as the new well goes, the operator will get a list from the UIC Department of Wichita on the requirements they need to follow, including an MIT, to go forth with the new recompletion.
And so once the recompletion work is performed, a new MIT test would be required before the operator can begin using the new recompleted well, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so I guess with that in mind, if we're looking at a situation where the MIT on the old well is not due yet, and the operator is performing these recompletion operations, what would be the point of performing an MIT on the old well, knowing that it's going to be changed and recompleted in a different configuration?
If the MIT was not due on the old well, then that changes the MIT requirements. An operator can redesign an injection well for a different well design, and that in itself would not have required the MIT done on the old configuration.
Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Because I guess assuming that the well is going to be changed after the recompletion, it's going to need the new MIT test regardless because of the different setup after the work is done, correct?
Yes, every new injection well, whether it's a recompletion or a new well, has to be MIT before the operator can use it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
With regard to Kodiak Petroleum, in September of 2022, staff issued penalty order in docket number 23 CONS 3076 CPEN regarding MIT being needed for a Seltman-Frick #1 well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you know the date on which that penalty order was actually served on Kodiak?
I don't know the date it was submitted to Kodiak. I know the date that I wrote up the recommendation was August 31st of 2021. No, that's wrong. 2022. I'm sorry. I'm a little confused here, looking at my paperwork. I'm looking at my penalty order recommendation that I wrote on August 31st of 2021. And I don't believe that's right. I think that date should be 2022. The MIT due date was May 26th of 2022. An extension was given to August 26th of 2022.
Okay.
That's what I have.
Thank you.
Well,
And so you don't know when exactly that penalty order was served on Kodiak, is that correct?
I don't have a date here for you.
Okay, thank you. Do you happen to know with regard to that penalty order, if it required Kodiak to comply with the terms within 30 days of the date of the order, or instead within 30 days after the date the order was served on Kodiak?
I'm going to object to this. This is outside of Mr. McLaren's scope of employment.
I think the witness has said he doesn't know when the order was served, but I'll let you continue on with your questioning, Mr. Jones.
Understood.
Yeah.
I believe, Mr. McLaren, in your pre-filed testimony, you made the statement that Kodiak was required to comply within 30 days of the date of the order on the Seltman-Frick well. Do you remember that?
I don't remember, but sounds right.
Okay. And so I guess my question then is, do you know if that 30-day period was actually from the date of the order or from the date that the order was served on Kodiak?
I don't know that for sure.
Okay, thank you. Do you recall the date on which staff suspended Kodiak's license for failure to timely comply with the penalty order on the Seltman Frick number 1 well?
I don't.
Thank you. And I believe we may have heard you say it earlier, but were you involved in recommending the penalty order for the EMIT test still being needed on the Seltman Frick number 1 well?
Yes, I wrote up the penalty recommendation.
At the time that the penalty recommendation was submitted, were you aware that Kodiak had submitted an application to recomplete the Seltman Frick number 1 well into a different zone?
I believe I had knowledge of that, yes.
Okay. And were you aware of, at that time, whether the recompletion application was approved or not approved?
No, I don't know.
And did you have any involvement in dealing with the recompletion application of Kodiak?
No.
Okay. After the penalty was ordered, were you aware that the recompletion application for the Seltman Frick well in regards to the design application was approved?
That I don't know for sure.
You don't know that either. Okay. And I guess it's your testimony that all of the matters related to the recompletion of that well and the application for the recompletion, that would have been handled in Wichita and not by you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. I have no further questions.
Thank you. I will turn to commissioner questions, and I will begin with Commissioner Keen.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. McLaren.
Morning, Commissioner.
A few questions for me. As I understand it, within the District 1 office in Dodge City, it appears to me that you wear several hats. You're the compliance officer, you're the UIC control coordinator, and you still have the title of environmental compliance regulatory specialist, or ECRS. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Within the, well, with respect to your ECRS responsibilities, Eric, which counties within District 1 are you responsible for?
Currently, I'm responsible for Hodgman, Ford, and Edwards County.
Okay. But with respect to your other responsibilities as compliance officer and UIC coordinator, you have those responsibilities. They are district-wide, are they not?
That is true.
Okay. I'm sorry, you said it was Ford, Edwards, and Hodgman. Did I have that right? On the ECRS?
Yes.
Okay. Are you, does the operator have activities in those 3 counties?
Nothing I'm aware of.
Okay. Are you aware, let's stretch it out then to the district and the responsibilities that you have as far as a compliance officer and UIC coordinator. Do you know, this is not intended to be a trick question. Do you know, are you familiar with Kodak's operations within District 1 generally?
Not in a large capacity, no.
Okay. For the record here, which county in District 1 is the Seltman Frick number 1 well located?
That's in Pawnee County.
Pawnee. All right. I have no further questions of this witness. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner King. Commissioner French, questions of the witness.
I have no questions of this witness. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McLaren, good morning.
Good morning.
In your capacity, either as one of those 3 different hats you are wearing, did you ever visit with the operator either in person or on the phone about the matters concerning this particular well?
I never spoke with anybody on person, but I did receive a few phone calls.
Okay, when you were out on site to, well, let me go back. You did receive a few phone calls.
Yes.
Were they clarification phone calls or do you recall?
Kind of like consultant questions, basically, or compliance questions, kind of. I believe it was Gary Nolan that I spoke to, and this was after the fact of what they could do to satisfy the MIT requirements on the well. And I believe I may have mentioned that he's going to have to test the casing. That's, they pulled tubing and packer out of the hole, and they needed to set a plug and test the casing to satisfy the MIT requirements.
And what role does Gary play with the company?
I'm not sure. I think he was a company man or a consultant or something like that.
Okay. In your opinion, did he express any concern to you at that time about either what he believed he was to do or how to do it?
It was pretty simple. I believe it's fairly self-explanatory, just to set a plug and test the casing.
Okay. Do you get phone calls of that nature in your work
I
from
do.
other operators?
Oh, yes, from time to time. Sure do.
Okay. So there was nothing unusual about his questions or concerns?
No.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Going back to Mr. Kimbrell, do you have any redirect?
Yes, a few, Chair Duffy.
Sure.
Mr. McLaren, why was an MIT necessary for the Sunland Brick number 1 in 2022?
It was just due. It was due for a 5-year test or whatever it was.
So 5-year test, where does that 5-year test come from?
It's just the schedule we have on MITs that a 5-year test constitutes the well has good integrity and good cement and plastic coated tubing.
Is there a commission regulation that requires a 5-year test?
I'm not sure.
Does filing for design approval for a recompletion mean that an MIT is no longer necessary for a well?
No, the MIT was still required.
All right. Did Kodiak Petroleum contact you that they had filed a design application for recompletion?
I can't remember if that's how I caught wind of it, but I was knowledgeable of that, yes.
Okay. And then you also mentioned that Gary Nolan with Kodiak Petroleum contacted you. Did he contact you before or after their license was suspended?
I believe it was after.
Thank you. If I could share my screen and bring up the penalty order in docket 23.CONSS 3076. All right, can you see the penalty order, Mr. McLaren?
Yes.
Okay. Going down to the ordering clauses on page 3, it says operator shall pay $1,000 penalty and operator shall perform a successful MIT on the subject well or plug the well. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Does it say anything about recompletion of the well would satisfy the penalty order?
No, it does not.
After receiving design approval for completion of a well, does that mean that the settlement brick no longer needs an MIT?
That is not correct.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Jones, do you have any recross?
I do not, Commissioner.
Okay, very good. Mr. McLaren, you may virtually step down and thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Duffy, if I may, John Myers here. I I know that staff is likely to call Richard Williams next. Mr. Williams' video is not ideal. We can't really see him very well. Before that proceeds, it might be best to see if you could adjust the video. That's all. Sorry for the interruption.
Nope, that's good. Mr. Kimbrell, if you'll call your witness.
All right.
And if you can adjust that camera, maybe, or there we go. There we go. Very good.
Great. Staff calls Richard Williams.
Morning.
Chair Duffy, would you be willing to swear him in?
Yes, I will. Okay, he's ready. All right, if you would raise your right hand. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Very good.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, could you please state your full name for the record?
Richard Williams,
By whom and in what capacity are you employed?
Kansas Corporation Commission, District 4 Hayes, 2301 East 13th Street, Hayes, Kansas. I am the compliance officer and also the temporary abandoned well coordinator and also an ECRS as needed.
Are you the same Richard Williams who caused to be filed in this docket direct testimony consisting of 6 pages and rebuttal testimony consisting of 5 pages?
Yes, I am.
Was this testimony created by you or at your direction?
Yes,
Now that you're under oath, do you have any corrections to make to your testimony?
I do not.
If I asked you today the same questions contained in your testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes,
Do you swear the answers contained in your pre-filed direct and rebuttal testimonies were and are true to the best of your knowledge?
yes, I do.
Chair Duffy, at this time, I would move for the admission of Richard Williams' pre-filed direct and rebuttal testimonies to the formal record.
Very good. Do I hear objection?
No.
Hearing none, it is so ordered.
Thank you. I turn to the witness for cross-examination.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Jones, if you would, please.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, I believe you heard us discussing the penalty order related to the Seltman Frick number 1 well. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And do you happen to know the date on which that penalty order was served on Kodiak?
I believe he just showed it up in the corner. The actual order was issued on back page. The shut-in order was actually, you mean the letter that they received with the 10-day notification?
No, sir. I'm talking about the actual penalty order for the Seltman Frick itself.
On the Fricket, no, that was out of Dodge. I'm not aware of what date that was. I can find it.
This for the Seltman Frick, does it sound familiar that the order was actually issued on September 13th, 2022?
I presume so. I'd have to dig back through the cross-examination and everything. I mean,
Okay. And so after the date that the order was issued, you're not aware of when it would have actually been received by Kodiak having been mailed to them. Is that correct?
I do not.
Okay. And do you recall the date on which staff suspended Kodiak's operator license for not complying with the penalty order related to the Seltman Frick number 1 well?
Yes, they were notified October 27th of 22 to immediately cease all operations in the state of Kansas, and a deadline date 10 days after, November 6th.
And do you happen to know why October 27th, 2022 was the date on which that letter notifying Kodiak of operator license suspension? Why October 27th, 2022 was used?
The letter states it was referring to the docket 23 cons CONS 3076, which is the Frick failure to perform the MIT on the Frick well.
And is there any information indicating that that date, October 27th, 2022, was 30 days after Kodiak had been served with the penalty order for the Seltman Frick well?
Well, if you look up the 3076, it has a deadline date in the actual order that states, the failure to comply with this order within this deadline date, your license will be suspended and shut in.
Thank you, sir. I guess I was just trying to determine if you knew whether that October 27th, 2022 date was actually 30 days from the date that Kodiak received the Seltman-Frick #1 penalty order.
Assume it is. I get a legal staff sends us out, all the compliance officers to every district, a list of licenses that are suspended, and then has the letters sent to us and everything with the follow-up dates that we perform.
So going back to that letter dated October 27th, 2022 that you referred to, it mentioned that if Kodiak did not cease all oil and gas operations after November 6, 2022, staff would recommend a shut-in order and $10,000 penalty. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
At the time that letter was sent, Kodiak's operator license was not yet suspended, or it had not yet been found to be, strike that. At the time that letter was sent, Kodiak had not yet found to be operating on a suspended license. Is that correct?
Repeat that.
Sorry. At the time that the October 27th, 2022 letter informing Kodiak that its operator's license was suspended was sent, Kodiak had not yet been found to be operating on a suspended license. Is that correct?
I did not inspect any leases until after the deadline date had passed. So
Okay.
I was not aware of any other leases being shut in at that time, no.
So how did staff determine that $10,000 penalty would be the appropriate recommendation in the event it found out that Kodiak was operating on a suspended license after that November 6th date?
I personally do not set the penalty recommendation amount. That's just the regulation that is stated in the rules and regs. That's a standard procedure, 10,000, minimum 10,000.
And so it is staff's position that the standard penalty is $10,000 for an operator operating on a suspended license.
10,000 or greater, yes.
So when determining this penalty amount, are there any facts or particular circumstances that will be considered to determine if $10,000 is the proper amount?
I do not set the amount on it. That's all done by the commissioners. I just follow the regulations and submit what I have in front of me.
And so there aren't any particular factors that would be considered in staff's recommendation of the amount of the penalty order. It would just always be $10,000. Is that correct?
It's not always 10,000. We've had recently as high as $100,000 on some shut-in orders failure.
And so I guess stated differently, the $10,000 amount is considered the minimum amount for issuance of a penalty order for operating on a suspended license in all circumstances.
I believe it's the starting point that's stated in the reg, and it's up to the commissioners to settle on agreement on the fine penalty order.
In your pre-file testimony, you cite to a number of prior penalty orders and indicate that in those orders, the $10,000 penalty amount was used and therefore would be appropriate to continue to be used in the current case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you review any of those prior orders cited in your pre-filed testimony to determine if they were challenged by the operators?
I personally have submitted several on my own. Yes.
And did any of the operators in those other dockets submit any evidence in an attempt to argue that the $10,000 penalty was not an appropriate amount in those other dockets?
That I have personally taken care of? No.
Okay. And does that the ones you personally have taken care of or have knowledge of, does that include all of those that you cited in your pre-filed testimony?
I mean, it's been a while back. I don't know what up to date was on the deal, but the last one was a month and a half, 2 months ago. So yeah, I mean, there's 10,000 has been about a standard. We've had some higher than that. Negligence on the operator's part of complying with the order.
And if the operators in those other dockets did not submit evidence challenging the $10,000 amount, how are you able to compare those prior situations to the current one involving Kodiak?
Like I said, I'm not the one involved in setting the final penalty order. That's just the standard 10,000 that we go with. I don't set the amount.
Okay, thank you. You indicate in your pre-filed testimony that because staff sent Kodiak a letter dated October 27th, 2022 regarding the license suspension, and that you saw the McReynolds 10-16 well operating on November 8th, it was your opinion that the 12-day period for Kodiak to shut down the wells was an unreasonable period for them to have not complied. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know how the October 27th, 2022 letter was sent to Kodiak? Email, mail, overnight, do you know?
There's several different ways the operators are notified. One being the letter from our legal staff. They notified that. They sent it out to us as well. Also on Kohler, which is operator management toolbar online database. Once the operator's license is suspended, it turns red. That's a notification, and it also states in their management toolbar that their license has been suspended. So, you know, I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Okay. And do you happen to know when Kodiak actually received that letter dated October 27th, 2022?
I personally do not know.
Okay, thank you. In your testimony, you indicated that staff only inspected the McReynolds lease in Rooks County after November 6th, 2022. Why was only the McReynolds lease inspected by staff?
McReynolds lease is located in Rooks County. I live in Rooks County, approximately 15-20 minutes away. That morning, if you look at my exhibit 3, page 3, the photo, it shows the date and time. I was on location. I actually took the photos after firing up the laptop and getting on RBDMS to make sure everything was still suspended. And I found that it was, and I took a photo. It stated 8:49 photo stamped on there on November 8th, 22. I just documented everything that way and followed through.
And your testimony indicated that staff did not visit any of Kodiak's other leases. Is that correct?
I've seen the closest other wells were hundreds of miles away down in Barton County. I had other issues going other directions, so I proceeded that way after finding this one. I see no need to go confirm all the others.
After visiting the McReynolds lease on November 8th, did staff attempt to contact Kodiak to discuss with them at all why the McReynolds well was still pumping?
I did not personally know.
Do you know if anybody else attempted to contact Kodiak at that time?
I'm not aware of our legal. I sent in the recommendation. And when I found this in operation, I notified them and sent them the inspection report. And I don't know if they notified them at that time. That's all I can tell you.
Would if someone had visited the other Kodiak leases and wells and found them to be either shut down or not shut down, would that have had any effect on staff's penalty order recommendation in this matter?
No, it would not. One well is you're out of compliance, you're out of compliance.
And so even if only one well was still operating, staff would take the same position that it's taken in this penalty order docket, that the $10,000 amount would be the appropriate amount, correct?
Correct.
Does staff do anything to take into consideration the circumstances behind why an operator may have still been operating after the license suspension?
Well, when you get a letter dated the October 27th and 12 days later, they had 10 days, 12 days later, I'm out there on November 8th, and they totally disregard, you know, I honestly, my own opinion is, you know, they disregarded their notification.
And so is that the only information that you take into consideration when determining whether the penalty order amount should be recommended at $10,000?
Like I said, I don't set the $10,000 penalty amount. That's just what the regulation states. I just submit what I find and let our attorneys and commissioners go for the rest.
And there's no attempt at that time when you believe you've found an operator operating on a suspended license. There's no attempt to determine the reasoning behind it or whether it was a mistake or willful ignorance of the order.
Well, I did not know who pumped the well, you know, therefore there's no sign with his name or phone number on it. You know, there's thousands of wells in our area. I personally do not know the pumpers for every well out there. No.
And again, I think you mentioned there was no attempt to reach out to Kodiak to discuss the situation with them after you visited the McReynolds well site on November 8th, correct?
On my part, I did not make contact, no.
Okay. That's all the questions I have right now, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm going to turn to commissioners for questions of the witness, and I'll start with Commissioner King. Do you have questions of this witness?
I do. Good morning, Mr. Williams.
Morning, Commissioner.
Just for the record here, you're in District 4. The District 4 office is located in Hayes. Mr. McLaren, who's previously testified, is in District 1, and that office is located in Dodge. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we have an instance here where the operator's activities transcended the boundaries between these districts, and you have wells. The operator operates within District 1 as well as District 4, where you are. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is.
I'm looking here at your background. It's really quite impressive. In a similar fashion to Mr. McLaren, in your case, within the District 4 office, correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears that you're the compliance officer, the temporary abandoned well coordinator, as well as serving as an environmental compliance and regulatory specialist, or ECRS. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
You are one busy guy. that is a lot of responsibility.
It is.
Let's focus, Richard, for a moment on your activities as an ECRS within District 4. In that context, which counties are you responsible for?
Living in Rooks County, we have other agents in that area, ECRSs. I fill in where guys are overloaded, plugins, MITs, or inspections or whatever. A lot of times, if I have like this instance was rather than disturbing the day-to-day operations of the ECRSs, this was 20 minutes from my house. I took it upon myself to go check it out. I have other instances out in Cheyenne County, 200-300 miles away. Same thing there, rather than disturbing and bothering the ECRSs that are busy right now with the oil boom, or shale boom, the high volume of work going on in the oil field. It's hard for the ECRSs to go check multiple leases, so I will do it myself and prepare the inspection report for the legal team.
Okay, so I kind of go back to my question though. As an ECRS, which counties are you specifically responsible for in District 4?
I'm sorry, I lost your audio there.
Which can you hear me now?
No, I cannot.
Can you hear me now? Can
Yes.
anybody else hear me now?
We can hear you, Commissioner King.
Okay.
Okay,
Can you hear me now, Richard?
Yes.
Let's try it again. Okay.
Okay.
Within District 4, how many counties, as an ECRS, how many counties are you personally responsible for? And which ones?
Well, I mean, Rooks, Graham, Ellis, it's all on my route to Hayes. I try to help out where needed and then fill in those positions. If,
Okay.
I mean, 19 counties, it's, you know, I fluctuate a lot.
I'm sorry. I just misunderstood your answer. You gave me a straightforward answer. I just didn't understand it. Basically, what you're telling me is all 19 counties within your district you're responsible for. That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay, that's fair enough. Are you familiar with Kodiak's operations and activities within these 19 counties?
Just within our district of the Barton County, they have 7 wells in our district. Barton County has 6 of those, and there's one up in Rooks County, the McReynolds.
Okay. Are you familiar? I know you're familiar with the McReynolds. Your testimony belies that. Are you familiar with their activities elsewhere within District 4?
Other than going back to prior dockets, you know, compliance issues we had before on the Tyndall lease on some non-reported spills where they were penalized to a commission order back then. That's the only other familiar I have with Kodiak.
Okay. I take it you have some familiarity with the McReynolds lease.
Actually, that was the first time I've ever visited that lease myself.
Okay. All right. When you were there, did you, other than to notice that this one particular McReynolds well, is this a one well lease?
Yes, it is. One well, tank barrier with the no saltwater disposal. They haul the water off.
Okay. How many stock tanks?
There's 2 stock tanks and 1 gun barrel and a water tank.
How large are the stock tanks?
I believe 210. I'd have to look at my photo. Yeah, there were 210s.
Okay. Are they fiberglass?
I'd have to go back to my report here. No, they were steel, and I think the fiberglass was the water tank. And yeah, the stock tanks were steel, and the gun barrel's fiberglass, and the water tank's fiberglass.
Okay. And they haul water, you said?
I'm sorry, what?
They haul off the water that's produced.
Yes, water is hooked up to no halo valve or nothing to dispose. It's all stored in a water tank and hauled out by a water truck.
Okay. How would you generally assess the operator's activities in terms of compliance, to the best of your knowledge?
Well, I mean, disregarding the commission order is, you know, what we enforce. You know, to me, that was, for being the first time on one of their leases, was kind of a shock to find it, but it's not uncommon. It's not a common practice for everybody to do it, but there's quite a few that, you know, disregard what we send out.
All right. How many times have you been out to the McReynolds lease?
Twice. The day I found it then, and then after they called and said the well was shut in, I went back, I believe. Or no, I did not go back out. No, I
Okay.
did. I've been there once.
How did the lease appearance strike you?
It was good. They had a lease sign up at our KR 3/126 lease sign. It was properly up. It was fenced out, had a dike around the tank battery. The well site seemed to be fairly clean. No obvious big spills, just, you know, typical oil field.
Do you know the pumper for this lease? Do you know Mr. Johan?
I do now, yes.
Okay.
I did not know he was pumping that well at the time, no.
Do you know any of their other pumpers?
Do I know any other pumpers?
Any of their other pumpers?
No, I do not.
Okay. All right, give me a moment. I believe that's all the questions I have for this witness. Thank you very much, Mr. Williams.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner King. Commissioner French, questions of the witness.
Thanks. I don't have any questions for Mr. Williams. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Williams. I do
Morning.
have a couple of questions. You stated this was the first time you had been out on the lease. And you were out there to see if it was shut in, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So you received notice that there was a due date for the shut-in of, and I believe if I'm not mistaken, in the testimony of Mr. Johnson, there are 22 wells, correct? But,
Correct.
all right. If you had gone to this well site and it had been shut in, would you have gone to, would you have traveled to any other?
I personally wouldn't have gone to Barton County. Would have left it to an ECRS, Bruce Rohde, who lived in Barton County, to work it in his schedule to go by and verify that they were all shut in.
Would you have communicated with him that the well you were on was shut in?
I would have assumed, with one well being shut in that they would have, but yes, I would have asked the ECRS to verify that the wells were all shut in, disposal shut in and everything.
Okay. But in your testimony, you said that after finding, and I am reading from page 4, line 14, after finding operator actively operating the McReynolds number 1016 well, I did not think it was a good use of staff's time to check operators' other leases, as we already had clear evidence that operator was engaging in unlawful production on a suspended lease. That is your testimony. Is that the normal behavior when you're checking to see if there is that an operator has complied with a shut-in?
Finding one well out in operation, I didn't see to bother it that day with the moment with the pressure of the oil field and everything and the workload that everybody has, to go individually check these other leases at that time. If I would not have found that, I would have asked them to work it in their schedule. And usually the ECRSs are very productive in doing that. They'll follow through within a day or two to go through all the other leases I sent. I'll email them a list of the wells I need them checked. So, in answer to your question, I would say, you have one well operating, it's pretty much set in stone that no wells are to be in operation. So,
Right. In your experience, Mr. Williams, have you ever had to go validate a shut-in?
yes, I have, and I've sealed them up also.
Okay. And also in your experience, how long does it take to shut in a well?
Well, usually the schedule of a pumper is to visit each well each day. Unless it's worked out with the operator to let them float, I don't know. This one being electrified has been very simple to just flip the electric switch and shut it off.
More than an hour?
No, I don't know. I think Mr. Yoham lives in Stockton. This well is probably maybe 7-8 miles from Stockton, just guessing. It's not far out. East of Stockton is all it is. I'd say 7-8 miles from Stockton. So half hour.
But once you're on the site, does it take 20 minutes, 15 minutes to shut it in?
5 minutes to go up and flip a switch.
You're literally flipping a switch because this was an electrified site, correct?
It's just like flipping the light switch on, you're shutting the well off.
Okay, all right. Does staff need to contact the operator, when it's discovered that a shut-in order was issued, the deadline has passed, and you are out there inspecting to ensure that they have met the requirement, does staff need to contact the operator and ask them why they're pumping? Or maybe not need, but is it a usual practice to contact the operator, call them up or email them and say, why are you still pumping?
No, I personally did not do it on this one. Usually, I mean, I submit everything to the legal department and let them handle it in with their penalty order. So.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Williams. I will.
Chair Duffy, if I could ask one follow-up question to your question.
Sure, please.
Yes. Richard, come back. I want to ask one follow-up question. What it's a follow-up to the question just asked of you by Chair Duffy. What obligation do you have as an ECRS or as a compliance officer within District 4? What obligation do you have to notify the operator and tell them, oh, by the way, you're out of compliance with a deadline?
With the TA database I run, I usually send out a 30-day reminder list that gives them a second notification there. They're notified on Kohler, on the TAs. The CP1s or plugin applications, if they're expired, they get another notice of violation sent to them. With spills, failure to return, unreported spill forms or whatever, that's all pretty much set in stone, the timeline dates on those. As far as me contacting operators, I'm not saying if I knew the pumper, I would say, hey, these wells need to be shut in. I would have done so probably, but I did not know. So therefore I did not. I contacted one prior operator, had contacted them and asked their pumper to meet me on location and visually have him shut them in, and I sealed them up. So it's multiple different variances because the pumpers can't always be in the same area you're going to be at that time and day because they cover a lot of wells at the same time.
Thank you, Chair Duffy.
Okay. When you seal them up, if you had gone to that well site and it had been shut in, then what is the action of sealing the site?
I would not have sealed it up if it was shut in. I would have just noted that it was shut down and shut in at that time. And rather than spending the time to come back and take the seals off when they want to start them back up, once they're in compliance with their orders.
Okay. And let me ask this question one other way. Another question. If you received a notice that you needed to go and make sure that an operator had ceased operation, and you came upon one of the wells where the operator had shut it in, would you go around and visit all the other wells that the operator is responsible for to ensure that all of the wells had been shut in per an order?
And if within reason, time wise, yes. Like I stated before, with our workload and everything, I personally, if there had been multiple wells on this lease, just being a one well lease, it was pretty open and shut door case. If there'd been multiple wells, I'd have gone to each well, even the disposal, because a lot of the disposals have outside water coming in and you're using that well and you're, disregarding the order on that fact. So,
Okay.
One well lease, I did not go to any other wells. No.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. Redirect, Mr. Kimbrell.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, you're familiar with the regulations regarding unlawful production on a suspended license, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Do the regulations say that it's fine to produce under suspended license if it's done by mistake?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Sure. Do the commission's regulations say that it's fine to operate under a suspended license if it's done by mistake?
No, it does not.
Thank you. No further questions.
Very good. Any recross?
I just have one thing, Commissioner. I believe you mentioned, Mr. Williams, a prior penalty order for, was it the Kindle or Kimbrel lease that you were familiar with?
Yeah, when I was going back through working this all up, that as a compliance officer, we also track numerous. We have a database where it keeps all the prior orders had been given to them, and I just had come across where they're, and being the TA coordinator, I have a TA database that also showed the wells that were TA, and I had in 2000 two non-reported spills that were issued into our legal department for commission order, and they were fined and processed back then.
And you said that was back in 2000, correct?
The due date on the invoice was April 14, 2001.
And do you know the outcome of those penalty orders as far as compliance?
They cleaned the spill up, and on both wells, both spills that were non-reported, and they paid their fine, and the case was closed.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Very good. Mr. Williams, you may virtually step down and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to push on, and it looks like we're ready for the operator's witness. Mr. Jones, if you would, please.
Yes, Kodiak would call Kent Johnson.
Here, Duffy, this is John Myers. What I'm going
Yes.
to do is we have a phone number who I assume is Mr. Johnson. I will unmute that so he doesn't have to try to figure out how to do it on his phone, and then we'll see what happens. So stand by.
Very good.
Looks like my option is to ask to unmute, which I have done. There we go. He is unmuted, so I will
All
mute
right.
myself.
Very good. Mr. Johnson, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right. If you will raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, it is.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Jones, please.
Mr. Johnson, can you please state your full name for the record?
Kent A. Johnson,
And where are you employed?
at Kodiak Petroleum.
What is your position at Kodiak Petroleum?
I am owner of the company.
Are you the same Kent Johnson who caused to be filed in this docket, the pre-filed testimony of Kent Johnson consisting of 8 pages of testimony, a verification page, and 2 exhibits?
I am.
Was this testimony created by you or at your direction?
Yes, it was.
Here under oath today, do you have any corrections to make to your pre-filed testimony?
I do not.
If I ask you today the same questions that were contained in your pre-filed testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, it would.
Do you swear the answers in your pre-filed testimony were true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, I do.
Commissioner, at this time, I would move to have pre-filed testimony of Kent Johnson and attached exhibits admitted to the formal record.
Any objection? Hearing none, it's so ordered. All right. Mr. Kimbrell, cross-exam.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by sharing my screen and bringing up the penalty order in this docket 23-CONS-3157. Mr. Johnson, can you see the screen, or are you completely just on your phone?
I cannot see a thing. I'm strictly on my phone.
Okay. I'm scrolling down to Exhibit A of the penalty order, the notice of license suspension. Do you happen to have a copy of that with you?
I do not.
Okay.
I remember
Uh,
receiving it. I remember reading it, but I do not have a copy in front of me.
Okay. And do you remember that the letter was dated October 27th, 2022?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. And do you recall that in the letter in bold, it states your license is hereby suspended until your license is reinstated. It is illegal for you to conduct oil and gas operations in Kansas.
Yes, I remember that.
Okay. And then the following sentence, if after 10 days from the date of this letter, November 6, 2022, commission staff discovers you performing oil and gas operations, staff will recommend a shut-in order, including an additional $10,000 penalty. Does that sound familiar?
It does, yes.
All right. When did you receive this letter?
I can't really remember. It was 4 or 5 days before the final shut-in date that we were supposed to comply with you gentlemen on. So the mail service is slow, and we didn't receive it in within 10, 12 days as was mentioned. We received it probably 4 or 5 days before the shut-in date.
Okay, I'm going
Since I
to.
did receive that, we did contact our pumpers and tell them what had happened and ask them to shut those in as soon as possible.
Okay, I'm going to turn to your pre-filed testimony, and I'm going to go to page 4, line 5. It says in there that you received the letter on November 2nd, 2022. Does that sound correct?
Yes, it does say that.
Okay. Going down to page 5.
So that'd be the 4 days I was referring to, yeah. And the shut-in date was supposed to be November 6th.
Okay. Going down to page 5 of your testimony on lines 16 through 18. It states that you contacted your pumpers on November 4th and November 5th in 2022 and told them to shut in the wells by no later than November 6th. Is that, do you remember that in your testimony?
Yes, I do. That's correct.
All right. Why did you wait until November 4th or 5th to contact your pumpers?
I frankly can't remember. We operate in several states, and I'm going to probably just blame it on being highly busy and didn't get to it in time. But I did contact them on the 4th and the 5th, and I told them make sure that they're shut in well before the 6th. So.
Right. And so it's correct that you didn't take any steps to shut in your wells before November 4th.
There was no ulterior motive. We simply, operate in several states, and I'm kind of a busy guy. So I apologize for that, but that's why.
Okay, but just in answer to my question, November 4th was the earliest date that you took any action to shut in your wells. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
All right. So now turning to page 7 of your testimony on lines 2 through 4, you state in your testimony that the McReynolds well was not shut in until November 8th. Is that still your testimony?
That's in my testimony. That was a surprise to me. I contacted Mr. Johan on the 4th and told him to make sure that they're shut in. That McReynolds well was shut in. He assured me he would take care of it, but I didn't even know about it not being shut in until I received a photograph from that Mr. Williams had taken, showing that the well was pumping. I was shocked. I had no idea. So that was the first knowledge I had of it not being shut in.
And Mr. Johan is the pumper for the McReynolds well. Is that correct?
Pardon me?
Mr. Johan is the pumper for the McReynolds well.
That's correct. Yes.
Yes,
Mr. Johan.
And he's an independent contractor. Is that also correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So turning to your testimony on page 6, line 11, you state that you called Mr. Johan on November 4th to shut in the well. It needed to be done by November 6th. Is that correct?
Right. That is correct.
Did you call Mr. Johan again on November 6th to make sure he had shut in the well?
I did not.
Okay. Did you take any steps to ensure that the well had been shut in by November 6th?
I've known Richard Johan for a long time, and he's always been very, very dependable. So when he failed to do that, I was quite surprised. I didn't expect that. So I trusted him. I thought he would get it done, and he didn't do it.
Is it your recollection that Kodiak Petroleum's license was reinstated on November 16th, 2022?
That's what I recall. Yes.
Okay. Between October 27th, 2022, when Kodiak's license was suspended, and November 16th, did you visit the McReynolds lease?
I did not.
Did anyone from Kodiak Petroleum visit the lease?
No, we did not.
Between October 27th, 2022 and November 16th, 2022, did you visit any of Kodiak Petroleum's leases?
I did not. I assume some of our pumpers went by from time to time to just check on things to make sure that there were no leaks, any issues like that. But I did not.
And your pumpers, are they all independent contractors?
Yes, they are.
So they're not directly employed by Kodiak Petroleum. They're on contract.
That's correct. Yep, correct.
Okay. So did anyone from Kodiak Petroleum visit any of Kodiak's leases between October 27th and November 16th?
We did not.
Okay. I'm going to move to staff's exhibit B. And I know you can't see this. It is an annual fluid report for the Master Griffin number 1-2 well for reporting year 2022. Do you remember filing this form?
I did not file it. I pulled together the monthly numbers, and I gave that to Mr. Gary Nolan, who used my monthly production numbers, injection numbers, and on my notes I told him that in November we only produced 14 days. I don't know how to say this, but Gary is getting a little long in the tooth, and he completely spaced it out, and he put down 31 days. That was a mistake on his part. Gary's a good guy. He's in his 80s, and he just messed up. So.
Okay. Well, before I getting there, I would ask that the commission take administrative notice of this document and admit it into the record.
Any objection? So ordered.
Thank you. So, Mr. Johnson, does Kodiak Petroleum dispose of fluids for other operators?
Yes, we do.
And do you get paid money to do that?
Yes, we get paid money. Likewise, other operators take our fluids and we pay them.
Okay.
It's
do you
standard procedure?
Do you dispose of fluids for other operators in the Master Griffin number 1-2 well?
We do. We dispose of fluid for Trek AEC. They own a well called the Kane Trust, and they produce about 1,565 barrels of water a day that we take into the mastery.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, looking at November of 2022, it looks like 57,800 barrels of fluid were injected in November. Does that sound correct?
57,800. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Pardon me. Yeah, in November, 57,800. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And as you mentioned, for days of injection, it has 30 days listed. Is that also correct?
Correct.
Okay. So looking at the other months where there are 30 days, 31 days, for most of those months, the barrels injected are less than for November. So are you saying that all 57,800 barrels were injected in 10 days, 12 days in November?
In 14 days.
In 14 days in November?
What happened was the Evans B had been shut in for a year and a half. We had a casing leak, and so that well was shut in for a year and a half. And we took steps in September and October to run. It was the old casing was 7-inch casing. We ran 5.5-inch casing inside the 7-inch and cemented that. And then we ordered up a new submersible pump, which we installed in October, and we started the well up for the first time on November 3rd. And then we got the notice to shut things in, so we shut that well in on November 5th, and then it was shut in from and the Kane Trust well was shut in from November 7th through November 18th. And then we restarted everything on November 19th. So during the last 10 days of November, we were producing into the well about 4,015 barrels of water per day into the master disposal well.
And the other operators that you dispose of fluids into the master well, what did they do with their water while the well was shut in?
They had to shut their well in as well. The only way they can produce is if we take their water. And so I told them, look, we had to shut in not only the Evans B, but also the Mastery, and therefore the Kane Trust had to be shut in as well, which they did. If you look at, I don't know if you've seen the report I submitted to Mr. Casey Jones, but in October, the Trek AC operation injected 41,040 barrels of water into the Mastery. In November, because they were shut in, they only injected 23,500 barrels into the Mastery. So
Okay.
they were shut in for 16 days as we were as well.
All right. And so if I understood correctly, you stated that Mr. Gary Nolan put in an inaccurate number for the number of days of injection. Is that your testimony?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I told Gary, here's the production for the month of November, and here's the production days, and he just spaced it out, and he should have put in 14. He put in 31 or 30, pardon me. So it was just a mistake on his part. It was an innocent mistake. Gary he's a great guy, but he makes mistakes from time to time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move now to Staff's Exhibit A. And Mr. Johnson, this is the summary document showing production at the different leases between October 27th and November 15th, 2022. Do you recall that document?
I do, yes.
And did you create that document?
I did.
And was that sent to staff as part of a discovery request?
It was, yes.
All right, Chair Duffy, I would ask that this Staff's Exhibit A be admitted into the record.
Any objection? Hearing none, it's so ordered.
All right, Mr. Johnson, I believe it shows that at the McReynolds, Evan, Panning, Weens leases that there were 123.58 barrels of oil produced while Kodiak Petroleum's license was suspended. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And the value of that oil was approximately $9,541. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes,
then additionally,
mm-hmm.
and then additionally at the Tyndall lease, there was 576 MCF of gas produced while Kodiak Petroleum's license was suspended. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the value of that gas was approximately $911.
Yes.
And so under the summary document that you provided to staff, it looks like the value of the oil and the value of the gas produced while Kodiak Petroleum's license was suspended was $10,453. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrell. We'll move to commissioner questions, and I'll begin with Commissioner Keen. Do you have questions of the witness, please?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
Good morning.
Just a few overview questions from me. How long have you been a licensed operator in Kansas? Do you recall?
Yes, 36 and a half years.
Okay. So how knowledgeable do you believe you are with respect to the Kansas oil and gas regulation requirements?
In general, I think I'm fairly knowledgeable. I certainly don't claim to be an expert. As I mentioned, we operate in several states. We've operated in up to 10 different states, and so I'm not an expert in Kansas regulations, but I certainly know enough to be careful and not step on toes and not make mistakes. In our 36 and a half years in Kansas, I've never had my license suspended.
Okay, fair enough. You headed in a direction I want to kind of pursue a little bit more, and that is an overview a bit of Kodiak. How many states do you operate in?
Right now, 4, and in the past up to 10.
Okay. Now, in Kansas, how many counties do you operate in?
Ooh, that's a good question. 4 or 5, I believe.
Okay. These are all in western Kansas, I presume?
Yes, they are. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have any idea how many producing wells you have in Kansas?
Today we have 22.
And how many injection wells in Kansas?
None. We have just disposal wells.
How many disposal wells do you have?
3 or 4, I believe. I think 4.
Okay. How many contract pumpers do you employ in Kansas?
Let's see. 4.
4. These are all independent contractors?
Yes, they are.
Do you have written well pumping contracts with these contract pumpers?
We do not. A lot of them have pumped for us for 20, 30 years. We've operated on a handshake with those gentlemen, and it's worked out great. They've been great.
All right. I can ask more questions along that line of Mr. Johan. It strikes me you have a lot of experience in the field. Am I correct?
That's for me?
Yes.
Yes, a fair amount. I've been doing this for over 50 years.
You strike me as being pretty knowledgeable. Well, I want your opinion about a couple of matters I need your opinion about. In your opinion, how serious is operating under a suspended license?
Oh, I think it's very serious. If I was aware of it, I wouldn't have done it. I mean, it was a pure accident. I really, like I said, in 36 years, I've never had a suspended license in Kansas or in any of the other 9 states we operate in. Never.
Okay. In the case of this McReynolds well, obviously, Mr. Johan is your contract pumper, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Well, who supervises or oversees his work, if anyone?
I contact him about once every month or two just to touch base, but he's been very reliable in the past. I've never had any problems. I mean, he's just done a marvelous job, so he's had no direct supervision in the field from any of us.
Does he provide you with periodic reports of some sort?
Yes, he does. Every month he sends in gauge sheets on the McReynolds well.
Is this McReynolds well an oil only well?
It's an oil well.
An oil well, okay. So my next question really is, although Mr. Johan is an independent contractor, uh, don't you, as the employing operator, have ultimate responsibility for the actions and results of Mr. Johann's work on your behalf?
I think the answer is yes, I do. Ultimately, we have ultimate responsibility, no question.
Okay. So in this instance, is it correct to say that he is your agent for purposes of assuring compliance with commission rules and regulation?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I won't do a screen share on on actually page 7 of your pre-filed testimony, but I will kind of paraphrase it for the record here. It's the question or the answer, frankly, that appears on line 20 if you happen to have access to it, where you're suggesting that Kodiak's willing to accept some punishment, but that I think, as you testified here, you believe the 10,000 is excessive. What do you think would be the appropriate punishment under the circumstances?
Mr. Jones asked me the same question, and I said I thought 1,000, and I still think that's probably reasonable. Everything that's happened here has just been a unfortunate mistake on our part. So it was not intentional. We have always tried to work in good faith, and what happened was certainly not willful on our part. It was certainly not intentional on our part. It was just purely an accident. Just an unfortunate mistake.
All right, let me turn. My questions are about at an end. Let me turn again to I don't know, Tristan, if you could do a screen share on page 6 of Mr. Johnson's pre-file. Yes, and I'm looking specifically here. I don't know if you have that before you, Mr. Johnson. Do you have that? Is that accessible?
I do, yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at basically lines 9 through 18. So if I have the timeline straight here, and you correct me if you believe I'm wrong, it's reflected on another page, but approximately November 2nd, you received notice of the fact that you were there was a requirement that you be shut in on or before the 6th of November. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And then it was on the 4th of November, with respect to this particular McReynolds well, that you called Mr. Johann, telling him in no event should he fail to shut this well in later than November 6th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then we'll get to, do you recall when it was that, then we have, pardon me, and then in terms of the timeline, Mr. Williams does a lease inspection on the 8th of November and discovers that the well is still producing. Is that correct to the best of your knowledge?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And then do you know on which date it was that Mr. Johann eventually shut in the well?
It's my understanding that he shut the well in on November 8th. I was not aware of that until I received a photograph from Mr. Williams showing the fact that it was indeed pumping on the 8th. That was my first knowledge of it. I as I mentioned before, I really thought it had been shut in immediately. I told him to shut it in no later than the 6th. And I found out later that he did not. It was just an oversight. Apparently, Mr. Johann's wife had some physical issues and she was in the hospital, so he was tied up with that situation.
Let me ask you, going back to your utilization of independent contractor pumpers, what's the standard procedure within Kodiak and your relationship with these pumpers? How frequently do they pump your wells? How frequently do they actually visit your various leases?
Most of them visit once a day on our high volume wells that are moving thousands of barrels a day. I have them go out there twice a day to make sure there's no issues, just to be safe.
Okay, and what was the practice with respect to the McReynolds well?
It's a low volume well. We move only about 10 barrels a day, and it's about 30-40% oil cut. So we make about 5-6 barrels of water per day and 3-4 barrels of oil per day. The water is pumped into a stock tank or a water tank, pardon me, and that is hauled away about once a month because it's a low volume well.
All right. Very well. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I have no further questions of this witness.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Commissioner King. I will turn to Commissioner French. Questions of the witness, please.
I have no questions, but thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, this is Susan Duffy. I do have a couple of questions. So I think you shared that you had a longstanding relationship with several of your pumpers. Was Mr. Johan one of those where you had a longstanding relationship with him?
Yes, we drilled the McReynolds well. I don't remember exactly when, but it was about 2004, 2005, and he's been pumping it ever since. So that's pushing nearly 20 years.
You also stated you were surprised that Mr. Johan had not, when you received notification by the KCC employee that the picture that your well was not closed in, that you were surprised as it was several days after you had requested him to do that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Were you also surprised that he had not called you to tell you that he had not closed in the well as you requested, that it be done by November 6th?
Yeah, that was a complete surprise. Richard's been very dependable and very reliable. So this situation really took me by surprise. But then I later learned that his wife was hospitalized and Richard was visiting her frequently. And because of that situation, he, I think, forgot about turning the well off.
Are there other pumpers in the area that you're knowledgeable of, Mr. Johan?
I am not, no, only Mr. Johan.
Okay. Let me ask you, you stated that your license had never been suspended in the state of Kansas. Have you received any violations since you've been an operator in the state? And if you have more than 10, less than 10, can you kind of give me an idea?
We've received over the years, I can't remember the number by any means. It's been 36 years, but I would guess we received 10, 15 notices of violation. Usually they were accompanied with fines of $100.
Right.
They were usually minor things like a spill. And we would always immediately pay those and clean up the spill if that was the case. And so, but we've never had a license suspended in Kansas or in the other 9 states we've operated in.
Okay, let me make sure I heard that correctly. You believe a spill is a minor violation in the state of Kansas?
Well, that was a bad choice of words. No, it's not a minor violation. I mean, it can be if you spill a barrel, if you say a stock tank develops a leak and all of a sudden you drain out 200 barrels of oil into the dike. That's a huge problem. But no, spills are never minor.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. It sounds like, Mr. Johnson, you kind of in your opening remarks, that you're a busy owner, operator of a lot of wells in a lot of states. Are you the contact person for the operation of wells in Kansas and these other states?
I am, yes.
Okay. So there's no go-between.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So let me ask you, do you view a shut-in notice, since you have never had one before, do you view that as a serious violation?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. As I mentioned, that's never happened to me before, where we've lost our license. I deem it or view it as extremely serious.
So when you called your contract pumpers, or the pumpers you've used for many, many years, to shut in your wells, I'm assuming you called them and spoke to them. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Were they surprised at what you were asking them to do?
I don't know what their overall reaction internally was, but most of them would say, "Okay, whatever you say, we'll do it." And so that was the typical response I got. And I personally called each one of them directly to make sure it got done.
Did any of them communicate back to you that they had closed in your wells?
Yes, Steve Crawford, who pumps wells for us in Barton County, told me he'd done that. He pumped several wells, and I wanted to make sure that was done. So I asked him to give me a call when he completed the job, and he said he would, and he did.
Did he have the bulk of the remaining 21 wells to close in?
Not the bulk. He had 7 wells, I believe.
So you had to call several of your contract pumping people, your hired people, to close in your wells. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and as I mentioned before, we have 4 or 5 pumpers in Kansas, and I contacted each one of those.
Is there a pumper that is nearby the McReynolds well, other than Mr. Johan?
No, that's he's the closest one. Most of our wells are in central Kansas and southern Kansas, and so we're talking distances of 100, 150, 200 miles for the other pumpers.
So Mr. Johan is, you really depend on him highly to ensure that this lone well is the needs are addressed, correct?
No, absolutely. And he lives in Stockton. As Mr. Williams said, the well itself is about 7 miles due east of Stockton. So Mr. Johan can, if he had to, hop in the car and run out there in 10, 15 minutes. So I depend on him totally on that well.
Okay. And how often did you say that Mr. Johan probably visited this well? I think you shared that it was a low producing, low volume well, but how often would he visit?
He would visit every day.
Every
I
day.
asked, each pumper to make sure that they visit each well every day to make sure there's no issues.
So that was
And
part
on,
of, okay, that was part of
Yeah.
his routine.
that's right. Yep. He would visit every day, and then on the higher volume wells, I have pumpers visit 2 times a day.
Okay, very good. That's all the questions I have of you, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate it. Let me turn to redirect with Mr. Jones.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Johnson, I just want to touch base on one thing. Mr. Kimbrell showed an exhibit regarding production that you prepared while the license was suspended. Do you remember talking with Mr. Kimbrell about that?
I do. Yes.
And he indicated that there was approximately $10,000 worth of production during the time the license was suspended. Do you remember that?
I do. Yes.
I want to just kind of make sure we're clear on the timing of that. For the production for each of the wells on that exhibit, except for the McReynolds well, when did that production occur while the license was suspended? Do you recall? Are you still with it?
I don't recall. I don't
I
recall.
guess let me rephrase that. Was the production from the wells besides the McReynolds well, was that production from October 27th until November 5th? Or was there production from any of the other wells November 6th or later?
No, all the other wells were shut in. So that production was not during the shut-in period.
So except for the McReynolds well, the production that was noted on the exhibit from that Mr. Kimbrell brought up was not production that occurred on or after November 6th of 2022, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so the production would have been before the date that was listed in the staff's letter as the date that the wells were required to be shut in by, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you.
Can I ask as a follow-up to that, how do you verify? Do you have daily? I mean, how you can say that number is what it is, but Mr. Johnson, how do you actually verify the dates and the amounts tied to each date for the production?
We go back and look at the gauge sheets. Each pumper is required to keep a gauge sheet, which they will then submit to us at the end of each month. And if there's some question as to how much do we produce during time A to time B, we go back to the gauge sheets, add up the production, look at the prices that we were being paid for the product at that point, and then do the math to get the dollar amount that was generated.
And time A to point A to point B can be a 24-hour time period?
Yeah, 24-hour, or if the question is how much did you produce during the first week in November, then it would be a 7-day period we would look at. And we were trying to comply with the KCC's requirement. You wanted an estimate of the amount of production that or amount of sales we had during a time period, and that's what we were trying to comply with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I will turn to Tristan for any recross.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
All right, very good. Mr. Johnson, you may virtually step down.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Folks, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We've been going at this now for 2 hours. So it is 10:56. We will go off the record and we will reconvene at 11:01. Please mute your microphones and you've got 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, it's 11:01. We're back on the record. Our next witness is operator witness Richard Johan. If you would, please, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Kodiak would like to call Richard Johan as the next witness.
Very good. Mr. Johan, if you'll raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes,
Very good.
Good morning, Mr. Johan. Can you please state your full name for the record?
my full name is Thomas Richard Johan.
And how are you employed, Mr. Johan?
I'm a contract pumper.
And in your position as a contract pumper, do you work for multiple operators?
Right.
Are you the same Richard Johan who caused to be filed in this docket pre-filed testimony of Richard Johan, consisting of 4 pages and a verification page?
Yes,
And was this testimony created by you or at your direction?
yes,
Here today, do you have any corrections to make to your pre-filed testimony?
no, not what I filled out.
If I ask you the same questions today as are in your pre-filed testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes,
And do you swear that the answers in your pre-filed testimony are true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
yes,
Commissioner, at this time, I move to have the pre-filed testimony of Richard Johan admitted to the formal record.
Any objections? Hearing none, it's so ordered. Okay. Mr. Kimbrell, the witness is ready for cross-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Johan, so you're an independent contractor. Do you have anyone else that works for you?
my boy's son works for me.
Sorry, so your son works for you?
Yes,
Okay. And what's his name?
Jared.
Just first name. Jared. Okay, thank you. What other oil and gas operators do you contract with?
We pump oils for Brexico out of Wichita, the DGH oil out of Logan, Kansas, which is a Dane Hansen Museum, Trek American Energies, Trans-Pacific, Kodiak, and then Arntz. Let me think here a minute. They changed their name. Evaluate Oil out of Colorado, North Star out of Colorado, Darrell Oil Company, LD Drilling out of Great Bend, Coral Production out of Colorado, Daymore out of Hayes. That should about take care of it.
That's enough. So how many wells are you the pumper for, roughly?
Pardon?
Out of all those contractors, out of all those different operators, how many total wells are you the pumper for, roughly?
I'm gonna say probably 80 to, I mean, between me and my son, they probably 80 wells total.
Okay. And are all those wells in?
That's
Oh,
just,
sorry, go ahead.
I mean, it could be 10 or less, 10 or more,
Okay.
10 or less. Hell, I'd have to stop and count them all.
Are all those wells in Rooks County or are they in other counties?
They're in Rooks County and Graham County.
Okay. So approximately how many of those 80 or so wells do you pump every day, each day?
I pump for Brexico and DG Hansen, which is 25 wells.
Okay. And does your son?
And this one for Kodiak too. I forgot to mention that.
Okay. And does your son pump a certain number of wells each day as well?
He pumps the rest of them.
Okay. And he does that every day?
Yes.
Okay. So are there ever any times when maybe your son is sick that you pump some of his wells?
Yes, we when he goes somewhere or takes a day off or has something to do, I pump his wells, and then he pumps mine when I don't pump them.
Okay, so on days that you're taking vacation or you're feeling sick,
Yeah.
he'll pump your wells for you. Okay. So I'd like to turn to your testimony.
Okay.
I'll do a screen share. Can you see your testimony?
Well, if I could read it,
All right.
it's pretty fine print.
Okay, I can make it a little larger. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So going to page 3, line 5 of your testimony, you stated that Mr. Johnson contacted you on November 4th, 2022 to shut in the McReynolds well. Is that correct?
Right.
And then I'll go ahead and read lines 3 through 7. You state in your testimony, my wife has a muscular disorder, which at times makes it difficult for her to get around on her own and take care of herself. When Mr. Johnson contacted me on November 4th, 2022, my wife was having a difficult time due to her disorder, and the afternoon of November 8th, 2022 was the first time I felt comfortable leaving her in order to go out to the McReynolds well to shut it down. Is that, did I read that correctly as far as you can?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So did you shut in the McReynolds well on November 8th then?
Yes.
Okay. So if I understand your testimony correctly, you didn't want to leave your wife between at least November 4th and November 8th. So for at least 4 days. So for those 4 other days, did you not pump any other wells for any other of the operators that you contract with?
No.
So for those 4 days, you didn't pump any wells at all?
No. Yeah, I pumped the other, I misunderstood you. I pumped some of the other wells that was close to the house.
Okay. And how close is the McReynolds well to your house?
Oh, probably 9 miles.
Okay. So during these 4 days, November 4th, November 8th, did you ask your son to shut in the McReynolds well?
I had him drive by to make sure nothing was leaking or running over.
And when did you ask him to do that?
Of a morning.
I'm sorry, what?
Do you want what days? At 6th and 7th?
Oh, okay. So he drove by on the 6th and 7th?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And why didn't you ask him to just shut in the well?
This is what I'm going to say. When Mr. Johnson called me and said he had a disposal well that did not pass the MIT test, we had to shut the McReynolds off, and I questioned that. And he said the state said shut them off. And my personal opinion, that well had nothing to do with that disposal well. And I put it on the back burner, and I got feeling uncomfortable and shut it off 8th.
Okay. So when you say you got to feeling uncomfortable, what do you mean? What made you start to feel uncomfortable?
I knew there was something wrong.
Okay. So you could have gone and shut down the well November 4th, 5th, or 6th. Is that what you're testifying to?
Yes, I could have, but
all right.
My wife's health was more important to me.
Right, but I thought you just testified that you didn't feel like the well needed to be shut down, and so that's why you didn't do it until the 8th. Did I misunderstand you?
Pardon?
I thought you just testified that you felt like the well didn't need to be shut down because...
Well, I was uncomfortable with the answer I got from Mr. Johnson.
And what do you mean by that? What answer did he give you?
Well, my experience with MIT and disposal wells are you shut the wells off that goes into that disposal well.
Okay, so you felt that the you felt that the license suspension didn't mean that you needed to shut in all of the wells for Kodiak Petroleum.
I did not know anything about the license suspensions until today.
Okay, so Mr. Johnson didn't explain to you why he wanted you to shut down the well?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay, I think at this time I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrell. We'll turn to commissioners for questions, and I'll begin with Commissioner Keen. Questions of the witness.
Yes, please. Good morning, Mr. Johan.
Good morning.
Tell me a bit about yourself. What's your experience in the oil patch? It strikes me it's substantial.
I've worked in the oil field probably 55 years.
Doing what different things?
I started out working, my first job in the oil field was in southeast Kansas, greasing rod lines in the oil field.
Okay.
And they had a rod line hooked up to one well, run across the pasture on the ground, and it pumped another well. And I'd go by and grease that rod line where they had boards laying under it and everything. You just squirted oil on it at 13 years old.
Okay, so you have experience, you have a lot of experience in pumping wells, right?
Right.
Have you worked on a pulling unit?
Yes.
You worked on a drilling rig?
No.
How long have you been a contract pumper?
Oh, probably 45 years.
All right. Most of this in the Rooks and Graham County area?
The last 40 years it's been in Rooks and Graham County, yes.
Okay. You gave us an impressive list of operators you work for. If I can ask, besides contract pumping, do you have any other sources of income?
No.
You don't farm?
No.
Okay. Let's talk about the scope of your responsibilities as a contract pumper for a moment here. What basically does your monitoring activities consist of? What does that amount to? When you go out to pump these wells, what do you do?
Just gauge the tanks, read the water meters on disposal wells, if there is any, make sure there's no leaks, grease the pumping units, and that's about it. I mean, make sure everything is running all right, not, banging and tearing things up, and maintaining the equipment the best of my ability, which would be just, greasing the pumping units and checking the gearboxes and making sure if there's any bad bearings or anything, report to the operator and have them fix it.
So if the prime mover here is an electric motor, I presume this is on electricity, is that correct?
Yes.
If the electric motor goes out, who replaces that? Do you do that or somebody else?
I call the operator and they have contractors or electricians come out and replace it. And then there are some of the oil companies, they give me that responsibility. I'll call the electricians and give them the horsepower and the RPMs, and they bring out another motor and put on.
So you're capable of changing out the motors?
Not now, because I'm damn near 80 years old. I can't do that stuff anymore.
Because of the weight?
Well, yes.
Okay. What if the siphon on the gun barrel gets plugged? Who has responsibility for correcting that? Is that a pumper's job?
Yes.
You've had that experience?
Yes.
And what happens when the siphon gets plugged? What's the problem that causes?
It runs everything over into the stock tanks, the oil, and if the well makes it's a high fluid level, it will eventually get the oil and water and everything over to the stock tanks.
That's correct. So let's go back to the McReynolds well for a second. How frequently in the ordinary course do you pump or monitor this well?
Go by it every day.
Okay. The tank battery configuration was a question I asked of Mr. Williams. Did you hear his response, and you agree with his response as to what how the tank battery is configured?
Yes, the only correction I've made there, I think he stated they was 210 gun or stock tanks. They're 200 barrel stock tanks, which
200 barrels, no tanks.
yeah, they're 12 or 10, which is a 200 barrel, which I think he quoted 210, which is no big deal.
These are steel tanks.
Yes.
How old are they?
They got a plate on the back. It's got stamped on it when they's made, but I'm going to say they're probably at least 30, 40 years old.
Okay.
That's just a rough estimate. They could be old.
Sorry, I don't mean to talk over you.
Yeah. Well, without actually going back and looking at that stamp, I mean, that's just an estimated guess.
I thought you might know. Are these two tanks equalized?
Pardon?
Is there an equalizer on these tanks?
Yes.
Is the equalizer kept open?
Yes.
What was the last day that you pumped then on this lease? Was November 3rd or 4th of 22?
Probably the 5th.
The 5th.
Yes.
The day after you spoke with, you had the conversation with with Mr. Johnson, right?
Right.
Okay. And then you weren't out at the well site until the 8th when you turned the well off. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. When you went out on the 5th, you know what the gauge was on the 5th?
That I cannot answer that. I mean, I don't keep a copy of the gauges I make out. I just make out one and send to him. And my house is not a storage room for book or papers like that. And I just make out one copy. I do not keep a copy at all of the gauges. Pardon,
okay.
Go ahead.
No, please go ahead and finish your thought.
But I just don't keep a copy of it because I haven't got room in my house to keep all that stuff stored.
I understand. Who purchases your oil?
That oil there goes to CHS.
CHS.
Yes.
And it's trucked out, right? There's a transport that comes and picks it up, right?
Yes.
Now, how frequently do you actually sell oil? Do you sell it when you get one tank full, or do you wait for both tanks? What's your procedure on this McReynolds lease?
When a tank gets 9'6" in it, it will equalize to the second tank, and that's when I call the load in.
Okay. Okay. So as I understand it, it's approximately 9 miles from your home to this lease, right?
Right.
If you were to shut in this well, what does that entail? How complicated is that to shut in this well?
Just getting out of the pickup and turning the toggle switch off.
Okay. The daily production of the well, what is that approximately?
It'll probably average two barrel a day. It makes a 1 inch a day, which would be 1.67, and periodically it'll make 2 inches, which is 3.4. Basically 2 barrel average a month.
And how much water does it make per day?
Probably 2 barrel a day.
2 barrel a day. This well pumps off, I presume.
It pumps 10% of the time, or 10% of an hour. So it pumps 10 minutes an hour.
It's on a time clock.
Right.
Okay. So if I understand it correctly, out of the roughly 80 or so wells that you and your son pump together, you're responsible for approximately 25 of those wells, ballpark.
Yeah, yes, for Brexico and DGH oil.
Okay. So from the 5th of November, when your wife was having these difficulties, from the 5th of November till the 8th, when you visited the McReynolds well again, were you pumping any of the other wells? You may have answered that before, but I don't remember the answer.
Yes, there's two leases, two leases. Well, two oil companies consist of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leases of within a half a mile to a mile of my house, and I looked after them. I'd probably go on 30 minutes at a time.
Okay. Had you pumped just the McReynolds well on any given day, round trip, to shut a well down and come back home, how much time would that take?
Probably, if I go across country, it'd probably take an hour. If I went around the blacktop, probably take 30 minutes. Or around the highway, I should say.
30 minutes to go 9 miles?
On the highway, yeah, you gotta go through town, stop at the stoplight. And cross country, it's just dirt roads and you just don't drive near as fast.
Let's go back to the question I asked you about the gun barrel siphon. Have you ever had tanks overflow because the gun barrel siphon was plugged?
Yes.
I think that's a major risk out in the oil patch. Am I correct or not?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. If a well goes unattended for 3, 4 days without anybody taking any, noticing the well at all, isn't that a risk factor?
Yes, it is.
That's my concern. Because basically, it could become not only a complicated problem because you've got oil and water in your stock tanks, but conceivably you can have oil and water in the stock tanks and in the whatever confinement area you have around the tanks or worse, right? That's the risk.
Right. Right.
Let me see, I think I'm about there. I have to go back to one line of questioning that Mr. Kimbrell directed to you because I'm uneasy about it. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. As I understand it then, you had instructions on the 4th for Mr. Johnson to shut in the well. But because you didn't, I guess, until today realize that the company was subject to a shut-in order, you didn't think it made any sense for you to shut the well in because there was another well several counties away that had a problem performing an MIT in a timely way. Is that correct?
Right. And can I make a statement?
Sure.
The disposal wells that they kind of let me in charge of, if it doesn't pass the MIT test, we shut the wells off. That water goes into there from 1 or 2 or 3 oil companies.
Okay.
Down the road a half a mile, the owner of this disposal well has got oil wells that doesn't go over here. We do not shut them down. Now, is that clear?
Well, I think what you're explaining to me are the practicalities behind which wells you shut down and when you shut them down.
Yeah.
But I think the hypothetical you're offering to me doesn't have anything to do with whether there's the operator's license has been suspended.
I did not know that at the time. If I knew that at the time, the well would have been shut off immediately. But I was never informed of that.
All right. All right, very well. Mr. Johan, I think that's the extent of my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Keen. I turn to Commissioner French. Questions of the witness, please.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Johan, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Johan.
Yes, ma'am.
I've got a couple of questions for you. So, Mr. Johnson has testified that he called you on November 4th and told you he needed to have that McReynolds well shut in, correct?
Correct.
Is it very often that he would call you?
He calls me periodically, probably about as much as I call him, because of no problems. I just don't call the people that I pump for if we don't have any problems.
Sure.
And they all understand that.
Very good. Okay. So when he shared with you that the well needed to be shut in, were you surprised?
I was surprised because I didn't get an answer on why it was to be shut down.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, in his testimony on page 6, says that on line 15, that you said you would get it done, correct?
Correct. And I didn't at that time on account of my wife's issues.
Okay. Mr. Johan, could your son Jared have done this?
Yes, he could have if I'd asked him, but I did not.
Okay. So your inability to do it personally was because of your wife's illness, but you chose not to ask your son to do it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Because you believed it did not need to be shut in. Is that correct?
My personal feelings, because I did not get a straight answer on why I had to shut it down. And my experience is my own belief of what I heard. There was no reason to shut that well off because it had nothing to do with that disposal well not passing the MIT test. If I knew his license was suspended, it would have been shut off immediately.
Okay. Have you ever shut in other wells because of license suspensions of your leases that you're responsible for?
Yes, back in, I'm going to say the late 90s to early 2000, I pumped some wells on a Chesney lease for an outfit out of Texas, and I can't recall their names. And I'm going to throw Rich Williams under the bus because we had to MIT that disposal well on them 3 leases, and he was there, I'm pretty sure. And the well passed the MIT test, and he told me, Richard, he says, we've got a problem. This guy has let his license elapse, and we got to shut the leases off. I shut the leases off and drove off the lease. I've never been back to them.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Those are all the questions.
I'm sorry, Rich, but I had to say that.
Sounds like you guys have some history.
I got Rich Williams on speed dial.
I'm sure you do. Did you think to give Mr. Williams a call and ask him what's going on with the McKenzie well?
No, I did not. But
Okay.
I talked to his understudy, Pat Bedore.
Okay. All right.
And I asked him, I didn't mention no names, but I asked him. He said, I know nothing about it. And then there's when I made my decision to shut the well off.
Okay. Very good. All right. Those are all the questions I have for you. Thank you, Mr. Johan.
Thank you, ma'am.
And I will turn to Mr. Jones for any redirect.
Yes, I just have a few things. Commissioner.
Yes.
Mr. Johan, I just kind of want to clear up a few things. I know you've mentioned now a couple times that you, in your phone call with Mr. Johnson, were not told that the operator's license was being suspended. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But you also mentioned, I believe, when you were testifying to Mr. Kimbrell's questions, that Mr. Johnson informed you that the well needed to be shut down due to a state order. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And is it true that Mr. Johnson told you that a state order required the well to be shut down?
That is what he told me. He said they told me I had to shut the McReynolds well off. And in the back of my mind, I always question why, because my experience in the oil field, that if that well does not go into any disposal well, it wasn't affected until the only way it would be affected is his license suspended. Then yes, they would shut everything down.
But at that time, though, you knew that there was, or you had at least been told that there was a state order requiring that well to be shut down.
Right. He told me to shut it off,
Sure.
but I did not.
And is it typical for a pumper to second guess an operator's instruction to shut in a well?
Not to my ability, but when you're ain't told the truth, it makes you wonder what you're going to do.
And do you believe it wasn't the truth when Mr. Johnson told you that the state order required the well to be shut in?
He never told me why.
But except for that there was a state order, correct?
That's the only thing he said. The disposal well did not pass the MIT test and they had to shut that well off. That's all the man told me.
Did you tell Mr. Johnson either on your phone call on November 4th or at any time after that, that you would not be shutting in the McReynolds well?
No, I told him, I did not tell him I would not shut it off.
Okay. And had you either around that time or any time before then informed Kodiak that your son was available to shut off the well in the event you weren't?
No.
Had Kodiak ever had any interaction with your son that you know of?
Not that I know of.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Jones. And I turn to Mr. Kimbrell for any recross.
Thank you. Just briefly, to clarify, so you said you were on the McReynolds lease on November 5th. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned that you felt like Mr. Johnson wasn't telling you the truth. Do you have any idea why he wouldn't have been telling you the truth?
I don't know. I can answer that. If a man would have told me that his license had been suspended, which I knew nothing about until today, the well would have been shut off immediately.
Do you feel like there's been times in the past when Mr. Johnson has been untruthful with you?
I don't think he was honest with me that day. Be right honest with you. I don't think he was.
All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Very good. You may virtually step down, Mr. Johan, and thank you.
Thank you. And hello, Rich. How are you?
Okay. Everybody shaking howdy. All righty. We're going to move to closing statements now. We'll begin with Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Commissioner. As we've heard here today, Kodiak has quite a history of operating in Kansas and elsewhere. And up to this point, at least in 2022, had not had what we would consider a major rule violation leading to license suspension. While there had been a few items of violation in the past, those had all been taken care of and dealt with in a timely fashion after it became a violation. In regards to what happened with the license suspension for not timely submitting an MIT on the Seltman Frick well, Kodiak made a mistake. It believed mistakenly that submitting an application to recomplete the well and receiving approval for that recompletion would take precedent over the existing MIT. After all, after the recompletion was done, it would have had to have a new MIT. And since those operations were imminent and it received a letter from the KCC informing it that a new MIT was needed after recompletion operations and before it could begin using the well for injection again, it believed that MIT after reconfiguration of the well was what it needed at that time. However, it learned of this being a mistake, this belief that an MIT was not needed until after recompletion. It learned that was a mistake when it received the letter dated October 27, 2022 from legal staff informing it that the license has been suspended. After receiving the letter, Kodiak got on the phone, called the pumpers who were local and who took charge of the wells in Kansas, and informed them to shut down the wells immediately, but in no event later than November 6th. However, the McReynolds well did not get shut down. We understand that there was some reasoning now behind why the McReynolds well was not shut down, but it was not because Kodiak did not tell the pumper to shut the well down, and it was not because Kodiak did not want the well shut down. Kodiak requested the well to be shut down. As we've heard, the pumper was dealing with his own matters at that time, and he failed to go out to the well until November 8th, 2022. To Kodiak's knowledge, the well was going to be shut down before November 6th, and it was not made aware that that did not occur until it received notice of this penalty order. Unfortunately, the penalty order for this McReynolds well is a culmination of an unfortunate set of circumstances. It's not the result of Kodiak willfully ignoring or choosing to look the other way when it received notice of violations. It also seems evident that based on the October 27, 2022 letter sent to Kodiak from staff and from testimony received today, that the penalty amount in this matter, the $10,000 penalty issued to Kodiak, was given without consideration of any specific factors regarding this situation. In fact, we've heard today that staff views the $10,000 amount as a minimum suggested penalty. While KSA 55164 authorizes up to a $10,000 penalty, it actually provides for the penalty amount to be that which constitutes an actual and substantial economic deterrent to a violation for which the penalty is assessed. $10,000 is not a minimum according to the statute. Prior orders of this commission, while not binding precedent, have in fact recognized that the statute is to be interpreted such that the intent of a penalty order is to obtain compliance with the relevant statutes and regulations and is not to enforce penalties in excess of amounts necessary to deter future misconduct. In order to determine what amount is necessary to deter future misconduct, it seems that facts and circumstances of a given situation are needed to be considered when determining what the penalty amount would be. A penalty to an operator who makes a genuine mistake is not the same as a penalty to an operator who willfully chooses to ignore or to violate commission rules or orders. In this case, we believe the result of the penalty order resulted from a mistake by Kodiak, and that should be taken into consideration when determining what exactly is the amount necessary to deter future misconduct. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Kimbrell, do you have a closing statement?
I do, thank you. Commissioners, the material facts in this docket are undisputed. Kodiak Petroleum's license was suspended October 27th. A license suspension letter was sent to Kodiak Petroleum stating that if staff discovered Kodiak Petroleum performing oil and gas operations after November 6th, staff would recommend a shut-in order and a $10,000 penalty. Staff did indeed find Kodiak Petroleum performing oil and gas operations on November 8th, 2022, after the deadline. During the period when Kodiak Petroleum's license was suspended, we heard testimony today that Kodiak Petroleum produced over $10,000 worth of oil and gas. We also heard testimony that from Mr. Johan that he could have shut in the well on November 4th, 5th, or 6th, but he chose not to. That in fact he was on the lease November 5th, and that his son drove by the lease on November 6th, on November 5th and 6th to check on the McReynolds well. Kodiak Petroleum should not be let off the hook for the actions of a pumper that they hired. Mr. Johan is an agent of Kodiak Petroleum. And Mr. Jones in his closing stated that Kodiak Petroleum did not willfully choose to ignore a commission order, but we heard testimony from Mr. Johan that he did choose to willfully ignore a commission order As Mr. Johan is the agent of Kodiak Petroleum willfully chose to ignore a commission order. For those reasons, the staff asked that the commission affirm the $10,000 penalty in this docket. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrell. Before we conclude, I believe that both of you did not request to file post-hearing briefs, and I'm assuming that this is still the case, correct? Mr. Kimbrell
Correct, yes.
and Mr. Jones?
That's correct.
Okay. Commissioners, are there any other issues for us to consider today? No, okay. This concludes our hearing in this docket. At this time, we will close the record and adjourn. Thank you all for your participation today, and be well, be safe. Thank you, IT, for your assistance as well.